Okay. Good evening. My name is Rebecca Fricka, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Amherst. The League is a nonpartisan organization that informs voters about elections, voting, and issues. As an organization, we neither support nor oppose political parties or candidates. The League is a unique organization in that all of our positions are based on membership consensus. In 2003, following several months of study and meetings on local government, our League adopted its current position on the concepts, principles, and practices that make for effective local government. This past fall, we had 2 meetings in which it was clear that our membership was divided between support of town meeting and support of the proposed charter. But it was also clear that we could still all agree on the principles of good government. As a result, our board voted to remain neutral and to take an educational and informational approach to the issue. This forum is part of that educational approach. The League has not taken a position on the charter. I'm going to say that again. The League has not taken a position on the charter, but encourages each voter to read the charter carefully and to cast an informed vote on March 27th. In the spirit of mutual respect and community, I ask you to take a deep breath. Okay, everyone, take a deep breath. Please open your minds and listen carefully to both sides of this issue. Karen Price, our moderator.
I want to announce that today is Rebecca Fricka's birthday. And it's a big one. I'm not going to say which one, but could we all sing happy birthday? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Rebecca. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Yes, this is a rather unusual way to celebrate a milestone birthday. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Karen Price. Karen is the president of the League of Women Voters of Needham and also serves on the board of directors of the State League. In Needham, she is a past member and chair of the Needham School Committee and has been a representative town meeting member for 20 years. From now until closing remarks, she will facilitate this forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for everybody who came out tonight. As far as getting us ready, I've read your Charter Commission set of final reports and recognize that the decision before you is not an easy one. The League of Women Voters is all about voting, yes, but importantly, informed voting. So the goal here is getting informed voters. When the voters go to the polls on March 27th, they enter informed on the issue and prepared to vote. The forum is structured to be fair and impartial, and I'm going to do my very best to keep it that way. To that end, please absolutely no clapping, shouting out, speaking out of turn. These are our usual requests. I will invite applause after the first half and at the end, and we request that you keep the auditorium free of electioneering during the program. And it looks like we're succeeding in that. So here's our process. The first half of the program will be questions that are based on a study that Rebecca referred to and subsequent consensus of the League of Women Voters of Amherst on principles, concepts, and practices of local government. These broad principles and related specific questions have been given to our 4 panelists in advance. One member of each 2-person team, which I'll refer to as in favor or opposed, will speak to each question for 3 minutes. I will call on the team by name, either in favor or opposed, and the responsible person will respond. And that would be only 1 person per team per question. There will be no rebuttal to the answers We expect each team to provide specific, concrete information to make their points. In the second half of the program, we'll take questions from the audience. You could submit your questions on the index cards provided, which you can give to one of the league members circulating in the audience. Please print your question clearly and hold it up for someone to pick up. We have question sorters at the front who will help me primarily by combining similar questions so that we can get to as many issues as possible. The questions will then be given me to pose to the two teams. Now, in the second round, the two team members may both speak to a question, if desired, but they cannot go over their 2-minute total. We have timekeepers in the front to keep us on track. Both teams will have an opportunity to speak to each question. After the last question is answered, without a break, each panelist will have 1 minute for a closing statement. Just a couple housekeeping announcements. Please turn off your phones. This includes audience members and panelists. Please do not take flash photos. It's, of course, distracting to hear phones and see flashing lights. Okay, so we're ready for the program. Let's meet the panel. They are all elected. They were all elected as charter commissioners and have worked on this issue for over a year. Please just raise your hand when I call, although you have signs in front of you. Andy Churchill and Mandy Jo Haneke are here speaking in favor of the proposed charter, and in opposition are Meg Gage and Jerry Weiss. We will begin with the questions that the League has submitted beforehand. As I said, each team will have 3 minutes to answer the question, one person, and no rebuttal. We're going to begin with the side in favor, as we figured out backstage, chosen at random. Then we will alternate which team goes first. We'll use the opposite order in the second half. So let's start with the first question. Here we go. Question number 1. In comparing the proposed charter and the current system of town government, which best promotes and ensures widespread, inclusive, and diverse participation in local government decision-making? Please give specific examples. And we're going to start with the in favor team.
So the question is, how do we get local decision-making in which we can all participate? We no longer have the pure democracy of New England-style open town meeting where everybody can show up and vote. We left that behind in 1938 when Amherst decided that with 6,000 people, we couldn't do it anymore. We're now over 37,000 with an $88 million budget. Amherst is a much more diverse and complicated place. So instead of pure democracy, where everyone participates, we have representative democracy, in which a smaller group of people represents everyone else. Representative town meeting and a representative town council offer two very different ways of doing democratic democracy, representative democracy. Town meeting is a representative sample approach with the idea that if you get 240 people from town in a room, you'll represent the town as a whole. The proposed town council, on the other hand, is a constituent approach based on having 13 visible representatives who are expected to represent the views of others and not just vote their own viewpoints. For the past 80 years, we've tried the representative sample approach. The problem is, our town meeting isn't a representative sample anymore. It may have been back when Amherst was much more homogeneous, but there's no way you can say it's a representative sample of Amherst today. Town meeting is older, whiter, and richer than the town as a whole, and you can find those percentages on the back of the Amherst for All brochure, which is not allowed in this auditorium. In terms of public participation, our town meeting deeply involves 240 people, but it's so unwieldy and hard to figure out that it's basically a black box for the other 37,000 of us. It's hard to know who's running, what they stand for, or how they voted. And with 80% of the seats uncontested, you generally can't even vote people out if they don't represent your views. Not only does representative town meeting not represent you as a constituent, but it's almost the only game in town in terms of participation. Right now, the only way to have a meaningful voice in decision-making in Amherst is time-consuming participation in town meeting or a year-round committee. I've tried to recruit people, young parents, busy professionals, people with diverse backgrounds, but often after one term they bounce out saying, I just can't do this. The time commitment skews who represents us toward those who are privileged with the time and the resources to do so. The new charter offers better representation for all the voters. 13 counselors will be visible and will be expected to represent the views of their constituents. Counselors will articulate positions before they're elected, serve as a point of contact for residents year-round, and can be held accountable for how they voted. The new charter offers more widespread participation as well, because it meets each resident at their own desired level of participation in a meaningful way. Town-wide forums, district meetings, accessible counselors, and voting that actually matters all offer new ways to include many more residents in our public decision-making than happens now.
Thank you, Andy. And speaking in opposition.
Thank you so much, Karen, and everyone, and a special thanks to the League for this opportunity, putting so much thought into it, and particularly for a process of developing questions that are based on values and principles. I really appreciate that. I'm glad this first question, focuses on decision-making and not just access to information or opportunities to comment on the decisions of others, particularly the focus on widespread inclusion and diverse participation. Clearly, this is a strength of our current system if we're talking about people participating in real decision-making. Let's look first at the structure of our current government and the proposed change. Town meeting is a decision-making, year-round legislative body with 240 elected members with 4 active committees, including the Finance Committee, that help town meeting prepare for and manage the deliberations on the policy recommendations brought by the executive branch, which is the Select Board, the manager, the school committee, and the library trustees, and also from the public. So the public's able to bring proposals to the legislative body for consideration. Our town meeting includes people from 19 to 90, and you have to really look at these statistics. If you take out of the statistics the students who don't vote in town elections, the average age of town meeting members is about pretty close to identical to the voters. Our 25% of town meeting members have school-aged children. Let's talk about the diversity issue. We did some research on town meeting membership. Of the people running for town meeting right now who will be elected on March 27th, those who support the current structure, 63% are women, 30% are people of color, 44% are renters, and 41% are students and college age. I just have to ask, did you just hold up the 1-minute sign?
Yes.
You did? Of those who support the charter, 60% are men compared with 63% women, 97% white, 94% homeowners. This makes sense because these diverse populations don't have the resources, and they would have a really hard time raising the funds and mounting the kind of campaign that's required to run for a city council. And my time just ran out.
No, you have 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. So the proposed charter, that was about town meeting, combines town meeting and the select board into one legislative executive body of 13 people, a reduction in decision-making participation of 95%. Article 8 is all about participation. I encourage you to read it. It's complicated, and I think we'll get to it later. The second way diverse constituents participate is voting, and we'll get to that later as well.
Thank you, Meg. Okay, we're going to go to the next question, and the opposing group will respond first. What major aspects of the current system of town government and the proposed charter government will guarantee open and full disclosure in all facets of the decision-making? So, opposed first.
Opposed first. Thank you. I chose the even-numbered questions tonight, and I see them as very, I'm trying to read my document, quite interrelated. They're all very similar in nature. All three come down to the question, for me, of which form of government does each person feel, all of you, me, will guard against conflicts of interest, undue influence by special interest groups in town, corruption, and power of money to get people elected. Now, there are state laws governing disclosure and conflict of interest that all boards and committees must follow. And there is a state ethics commission, which any member of any board or committee has a right to call anytime they have a concern about a possible conflict of interest. Another law that can be a safeguard is open meeting law, which states that any communication of a majority of any board or committee must be open to the public with minutes taken. Thus, 3 select board members cannot meet legally to discuss a current issue taken up by the select board. And 7 of the 13 counselors, should this pass, could not do so. But 6 of the 13 could legally meet in private. And as we all know, laws can only go so far in safeguarding against any kind of corruption or undue influence. Town meeting doesn't even fall under open meeting law or conflict of interest laws, and you might wonder, why is that? Well, it would take a secret meeting or email conversation by 121 members to violate open meeting law. And that doesn't happen. Groups do get together, but nowhere near 121. And because town meeting is intended to be a very large body, one or a few people who might benefit from a measure don't have to announce the benefit that will come to them. They can't exert enough influence over a body of 160, let alone 240 people to matter. The size of town meeting, not the laws, is the safety net. Dilution and visibility are a protection greater in my mind than any law. Town meeting is a melting pot of interests. While disclosure is highly desirable, it is the large number of conflicting interests that prevents any one interest from predominating, as James Madison pointed out in the Federalist Papers. How any council deals with conflict of interest or even defines it can be quite an issue. A tight definition of conflict of interest means nobody could run. And once you start flexing the definition, things can happen and people will have to recuse themselves, and that lowers the number of votes needed to pass a motion. So it comes down to what form of government do we trust most to protect us from these kinds of influences? Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Perfect. Okay, now we'll go to the team in favor.
Thank you. This question goes directly to transparency, openness, and accountability of our government, which I believe the proposed council manager structure handles better than our current representative town meeting. Jerry touched on open meeting law. The principles the league supports say that adherence to open meeting law must be strictly maintained. And as he said, representative town meeting isn't subject to open meeting law or conflict of interest. A town council is subject to that, both open meeting law and conflict of interest, which requires councilors to deliberate in the open and make decisions in the open and discuss the issues in the open. And they must, if they're discussing an issue, disclose their conflict if they have a financial or other interest in the matter being discussed. When representative town meeting is not included in this, this means that the body making those decisions can discuss issues in private, away from the public, without violating the law. In fact, there are private listservs that include large numbers of representative town meeting members that discuss in private their voting plans prior to arriving at town meeting. And there are many examples of town meeting members advocating for a position in town meeting on the floor of town meeting to their other representatives that will be voting on it, that would benefit them financially, and they don't disclose that conflict. That's not how government should work. The proposed charter also has many other ways to ensure that an open, deliberative, fully disclosed, and inclusive decision-making process happens. The district meetings, the townwide forums, accessible counselors who respond to feedback, and campaigns that discuss the major issues facing the town. A town council can also take as much time as it needs to make decisions, including sending things back to committees or the other side and making sure it comes back to a vote within a couple of weeks. They're required to have a discussion at 2 separate meetings. Again, bringing the public back into the discussion early and often before decisions are made. The town meeting structure goes against this goal of openness early in the decision-making process, which allows residents to be a part of the process. By the time something reaches the floor of town meeting and begins involving many residents, the decisions have largely been made. Amendments to the proposals are limited, made the night of town meeting, and have to be voted on that night. That excludes the general public from discussing those amendments and changes. The deliberative ability of a town council allows for challenges to and corrections of misstatements of fact. The structure of town meeting, where you can't directly address other members and you must be recognized by the moderator to speak, allows for that misinformation to be uncorrected and unchallenged. All of these issues, accessible decision makers, as the proposed charter guarantees, it guarantees a transparent, open, inclusive, and more deliberative decision-making process. Amherst's representative town meeting structure lacks that right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mandy. Okay, we're going to the third question, which we'll start with the in favor group. What crucial checks and balances exist in each form of local government, and which best guarantees that those checks and balances are practiced? So we're starting with in favor.
And that would be me again. So first, the voters are an important part of decision-making and government that should not be discounted. While they might not be a Civics 101 branch of government, they should not be discounted. Candidates that have to make their case, state their positions before they get elected, and to stay elected, bring people into the process and create a system that involves the entire public. Beyond that, the proposed council manager structure has the shared responsibility among various branches of government. It's another way of thinking about this question. It's a model in place in municipalities governing over 1/3 of the residents of the United States. The town council in the proposed charter has responsibility for enacting bylaws and the budget, while the town manager, the chief executive officer, is responsible for implementing the budget, overseeing day-to-day operations, and enforcing the bylaws. This separation is detailed in section 1.3 of the charter. The town council is also prohibited from inserting itself into the administrative affairs of the town by section 2.3 of the charter. And the town council isn't allowed to interfere in school committee or library trustee matters, as the opposition seems to imply. Section 2.8 limits town council's power to seeking information on matters within the jurisdiction of the town council. That's an important clause. So things like the budget that the town council votes on, they can ask superintendent or library director about. But school and library policies remain within the school committee and library trustees' jurisdiction, so they're off limits to the town council. That's much different than the opposition implies. Town council appointments are split between the legislative and executive branches. Planning board, zoning board of appeals are made by the town council. The rest of the boards and committees and department heads are made by the town manager, the executive, the chief executive. The legislative branch confirms executive appointments, creating a balance of powers that encourages both branches to work together. This is similar to the current relationship between the school committee and the superintendent. The superintendent appoints senior staff members like the assistant superintendent, the business manager, and the special education director, while the school committee confirms them. This is not an unusual provision in charters. It's actually in 7 of the 8 charters I reviewed in council manager towns. The current charter has no checks and balances between town meeting and the select board, and that's important. Nearly all appointments except for the finance committee are made by a single branch, the executive, without any input from the legislative branch. There's no check on town meeting. There's no veto of town meeting actions. There's no recourse at the ballot box on town meeting members for their vote. That's a problem. It's a system that leaves 37,000 residents out in the cold if they don't like what town meeting is doing. So in sum, checks and balances between the two branches of government are present in the proposed charter and in the council manager structure. The council manager proposal provides checks and balances that the current representative town meeting structure is missing.
Thank you, Mandy. And let's go to the opposed group.
Thank you. To me, the single biggest problem of the new charter, the proposed charter, is the lack of checks and balances. Currently, we have a legislative branch, town meeting, and an executive branch, which is, as I said earlier, the select board, town manager, library trustees, and the school department. Let's step back and remind ourselves about what the separation of powers is all about. The executive and legislative branches, typically in a democracy, check each other. They're not random divisions of power into two groups, but they're two distinct kinds of power and their natures are different, and that's part of why they check each other. The executive needs to be nimble, responsive, managing things, a proposer of policy and budget, and the legislative branch is supposed to be deliberative, reflective, thinking things through, approving policy after it's amended or not. A good legislative process requires dialogue, which many people find annoying and inefficient, but that's part of what it is. The new charter merges the 240 plus the ex officio positions and the select board into one branch, which is kind of a quasi-executive legislative branch, both in one. Let me give you a quick summary. The council appoints all committees and then approves the policy proposals that they put forward. So, hey, I'm the council. Hey, I'm appointing the planning committee. Thanks, council. Here are some zoning bylaw changes we want. Thanks, planning committee. Now, as the legislative branch, I'm approving them. It's just, there isn't any separation. The council approves all of the manager's department hires, so that means in a public meeting, the manager has to come in and explain why he or she would like to hire a certain person without the council having been to the reference checks, been to the interviews, and certainly without knowing the dynamics that the manager may be trying to address in hiring a particular person. The council can investigate any manner in the libraries and schools, and Mandy just referred to it's limited to what the matters of the council, it's limited by the council's jurisdiction. Well, under 2.5 in the charter, it says, unless otherwise provided, all powers of the town shall be vested in the town council as a whole. So it can really investigate pretty much anything. The redevelopment authority is now elected. It would be appointed by the council. Please look at Article 8, which is, again, all about citizen participation, to see how limited it is. The other question to look at is the degree to which these public forums and input happen before or after decisions are made. Are they just information, and what's the level of people's input isn't necessarily decisive about anything.
Thank you. Thank you, Meg. Okay. Moving on to question 4. We'll start with the opposed group. Explain how honesty and non-corruptibility are ensured under each form of government, especially in regard to susceptibility to undue influence on public officials not being beholden to special interest. Opposed.
I would argue that neither form of government ensures any kind of uncorruptibility or undue influence. It's up to the morality of each person in the room. And no form of government or set of laws can control that. Any review of indictments of mayors and councilors across the country will confirm that. In the same vein, I pretty much seriously doubt that any town meeting members have ever been indicted for corruption. Specific special interest will always, but only always, attempt to influence any kind of government. The question is, for everyone, which form of government will present the higher likelihood of this being successful? There have been times over the years that certain groups have tried to stack town meeting to get voting results to their liking, and historically it doesn't work well. In fact, representative town meeting makes it harder to do than open town meeting, in which an interest group could get enough people to show up on a night for one single vote. That can't happen in representative town meeting, where a large body showing up for just one vote would also have to run for office, be elected, and serve in town meeting, and not just for one night. It just doesn't work in a representative town meeting. With the power vested in the proposed charter, the council would control the composition of all boards and committees in town, oversee a much weaker town manager position, make all decisions about when to study and vote on every issue, which creates a circular power loop of decision-making. It's my belief that small, powerful bodies such as the proposed council, who gain their power through costly campaigns and enjoy that power unchecked by another elected branch of government, are the perfect target for special interests, with financial gains to be had through favorable zoning or other bylaws. This doesn't have to be about corruption. It may simply be the result of how influence works in any government setting. In the proposed charter, council elections are the hoped-for check on power. But attempting to vote out a councilor is both unlikely given all the evidence to the contrary in statewide council elections. 60% of council seats statewide are uncontested, and 90% of incumbents win a re-election. And not being part of the actual decision-making process, voters would be reduced to Monday morning quarterbacking, angrily trying to vote out candidates based on fractious single issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. In favor?
So this is where we talk about fears of campaign money and developers controlling things. In terms of campaign money, there's only so many things you can spend it on. And those are the same things select board and school committee candidates spend it on now. Brochures, lawn signs, maybe newspaper or Facebook ads. We have town-wide elections now. The at-large councilor races in the new plan should be similar in terms of dollars needed. And the smaller district councilor races would need even less. Also, to help level the playing field for all potential candidates, the new charter adds a public page on the town website where any registered candidate can post a profile as a starting point to their campaign. Donations over $50 will be made public by law. And Amherst voters aren't dumb. Any candidates getting large contributions are very likely to find that working against them. For an example of council funding, look at what happened with the Greenfield election. Ashley Stemple, a Greenfield native, 31 years old, campaigned on the basis of 100% green energy, sustainable economic development, and bringing people of different ethnicities together. She spent a total of $447 on her campaign, and she defeated another candidate who spent almost $4,000. Penny Ricketts, an African-American single mom, received the most votes in that election, and she spent just over $1,000. Now, developers. Opponents keep trying to say that this is a developers versus environmentalists thing, but that's simply not true. Amherst for All is chaired by a professional environmentalist who cut her teeth with MassPerg. This is about democracy, not development. But it's important to recognize that development pressure will continue in the future, as will concern about high taxes and broadening the tax base. Which body will be more effective in managing that in a way that represents the whole community? A council that represents the interests of the town and its neighborhoods, that can take the time to be thoughtful and informed, that can solicit input from residents, staff, and experts, that engages frequently enough with the issues to understand the broader context. Neighborhoods will elect 10 of the 13 councilors, and 5 council members can stop a zoning change. Opponents have recently claimed that this charter will change everything. Well, it doesn't change everything. It doesn't change the most important participant in our local government, the voters of Amherst. Opponents have a disturbing lack of faith in our citizens' ability to elect sober, responsible, compassionate representatives who will reflect the largely shared values that we hold dear in this town. Finally, a side note on big money in this current campaign. Opponents keep trying to paint the Amherst for All campaign as the big money campaign. But Amherst for All has raised all its funding through small donations, averaging about $67 apiece, with only one as high as $250. The opposition groups got $5,000 from just 4 individuals, and with one donor contributing $2,400 alone.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, now we're on question 5, and we'll start with the in favor group. Which form of government best balances maximum efficiency in decision-making with informed deliberation and widespread citizen participation?
So I first want to mention that the charter keeps the professional management of day-to-day administration by a professional town manager. But this charter isn't about efficiency for efficiency's sakes. It's about effectiveness, participation, and informed decision-making. Amherst residents deserve informed year-round decision-makers who have the opportunity to deliberate on important matters and who can be proactive when they sense something isn't working. Officials who stay informed year-round are subject to those conflict of interest laws and have a fiduciary responsibility to the residents are better able to connect those dots. There's no way now in our current representative town meeting structure to have an ongoing collaborative community conversation about the major needs in town, like a South Amherst firehouse, new elementary schools, or meeting the needs at the libraries. The charter will improve the decision-making ability of the legislature by enabling connection of individual proposals to the big picture. It'll ensure timely decision-making. No longer will proposals stack up waiting to be heard at one of 2 town meeting sessions a year, and if they need more work, having to wait another 6 months to come back instead of a couple weeks if that's all they need. Elected legislators in a town council can come together and actually discuss the budgetary, financial, and planning matters without artificial time limits being imposed. In fact, Meg Gage recently said the legislative branch is supposed to be deliberative. A town council will be deliberative. Town meeting, just by its simple structure, can't be deliberative. And it's about widespread participation. Right now, we have participation by 240 people, with the other 37,000 residents pretty much excluded from the process. Lack of competitive campaigns, lack of discussion of the issues, decisions that have to be made the night amendments are proposed, it just excludes the 37,000 residents that aren't serving in town meeting. So the charter seeks to bring everybody back into the process at the level of involvement that fits each person's desired involvement, but is still meaningful with the district meetings, the townwide forums. It will better represent neighborhood interests, but also the interests of the town as a whole. The proposed charter ensures that decision-making and the public will be engaged throughout the decision-making process, the decision makers and the public. The process will be more timely, effective, and participatory, enabling community-wide conversations and collaborations that focus on the big picture issues that are just not possible right now with our representative town meeting.
Thank you, Mandy. And same question, the opposed group.
So this is a great question. It's one of those classic political science questions: efficiency, doing things versus informed deliberation. And they're obviously in tension. That's the point of the question. This is not an easy answer. This has been the subject of political theory since Plato, of the Federalist Papers, and originally our House of Representatives was not directly elected because our founders didn't want the riffraff being too deliberative and messy and inefficient. I feel the very structured and carefully managed debate of town meeting, supported by its 4 year-round committees, provides a much better balance of these two things that are always in tension in any democracy than a 13-person council that is both legislative and executive in one. Town meeting is a lot more efficient than many people realize, and constantly creating new mechanisms for greater efficiency. And their committee welcomes the public suggestions of how there could be greater efficiency. And there are a lot of ideas flying around that I don't have time to share. The new electronic voting system saves time and allows the public to see how representatives voted the day after each vote. It's a lot easier to monitor than, for example, how Solomon Goldstein Rose or Jim McGovern voted on the previous day. And I'm tempted to give you some examples of the way they voted that you might not have known and be surprised. The precinct meetings for town meeting members help them prepare and have more back and forth and dialogue at that level than is possible at the larger forum. Like any good legislature, a lot of the deliberation doesn't happen in the at-large forum. It happens at the precinct meetings, it happens at the committees. And I think we need to make sure that the public in general knows about those precinct meetings and comes to them. The city charter proposes a very efficient decision-making process. That's what its strength is, efficiency. But one with no citizen participation, hardly, other than electing council members and speaking during public comments of meetings, and a variety of different petition opportunities requiring a large number of signatures, and then not necessarily guaranteeing approval. I again invite you to carefully read Article 8, which is where it's all laid out, and maybe in the questions we'll have an answer. The other end of the balance between efficiency and deliberation is in voting. And in all of the state, 350, the communities that have, that sign is, the communities that have a council manager like is proposed for here, compared with communities that have representative town meeting, the voter participation is exactly the same, 19%. Randolph in 2009, I hate cherry picking, but it is kind of a good example, changed in 2009 from representative town meeting to a council, whoops, I just slipped off the table, council manager.
Your time is
and
up.
their participation decreased from 27% to 19%.
Okay, thank you, Meg. Okay, the last
distracted
question
by-
in the first
Thank you.
part, as soon as we get the
This is bold.
card back up.
That's my secret password.
Last question in this session starts with the opposing group. How does each form of government best ensure that those making policy and fiscal decisions are accountable to the residents of the town, and what are those safeguards?
Again, neither can ensure really anything. Neither can guarantee anything. A lot has been said about how unaccountable town meeting is to the residents. And once again, I turn to the power of numbers as the ultimate force of accountability. Large numbers of people directly voting for the laws and the budget and the taxes that they will live under. And with those large numbers, including people from 20 to 90 years of age, people of low, middle, and high incomes, renters, homeowners, people of many ethnicities and abilities, stands the best chance of representing the residents' needs, wishes, and values. I've heard complaints that it's hard to know what's going on in town meeting. In reality, it will be just as hard, or easy, as the case may be, as it is now to find out what's going on in council meetings. Perhaps harder because they will be meeting more often, so there'll be a lot more to track. However, it will take the same process in either scenario to find out what's going on. You have to go to the meetings or watch them on TV. That will not stop. It will take the same process to find out how people voted. Go to the town website where all town meeting votes are recorded. Same process when you have a council. And residents can now contact every one of their town meeting reps with one click of a mouse, an innovation introduced over a year ago into town meeting. There are several precinct meetings which the public can attend as well. Somehow, the required twice yearly district meetings with councilors, somehow that will be known by all, will fit into the schedules of all the constituents and ensure all concerns are heard and acted on. I don't see that happening. The current system we have continues to evolve and be improved. We don't need a charter change to continue with these changes and improve our system. The larger the sample size, the more likely it will be to reflect the population from which it is drawn. And this statistical reality relies on an important factor, random selection. And random selection depends on barriers or lack thereof to participation for anyone or any group to be in town meeting or to be on a council. Representative town meeting has far fewer barriers to serve than a council will. That is why we have such a diverse group of people in town meeting. Getting elected to the council will have barriers of money, connections to other people, and time to campaign. Representative town meeting does not have those barriers. If you want to serve in town meeting, eventually you will get the opportunity, even in highly contested precincts, without spending lots of money, without having to find that money, and without having to spend hours and hours of campaigning.
Thank you. And in favor?
Okay, so the core function of democratic government is to represent the will of the people. But let me ask you, do you feel represented? Do you know who your 24 representatives are? Do you know what they stand for? Do you know how they voted on key issues? And if you didn't like how they voted, could you vote them out? For too many Amherst residents, the answer to all these questions is no. As chair of the Charter Commission, I heard people say they don't know who to call when they need help or want to express their opinion about decisions facing Amherst. Lots of people want to have a voice, but not in the time-consuming way our representative town meeting requires. In doing my research, I talked to Mayor Narkowitz in Northampton, asking him about what it would be like to have a mayor in Amherst. And while he, not surprisingly, thought having a mayor was good, he actually pointed out that the council would be the biggest benefit for Amherst. He thought we would be pleasantly surprised by what a difference it would make to actually have representatives whose role is to reach out to the community, listen to them, represent them, and communicate with them about local government. The new proposal replaces our select board and representative town meeting with a highly visible, informed, representative, accountable, 13-person town council that can deliberate and make decisions in a thoughtful and timely manner year-round. You can think of it as a slightly larger and more representative select board, but one that can both deliberate on issues until they're ready and then make thoughtful decisions based on that deliberation. And we can actually hold them accountable for the votes they make, unlike our current decision makers in representative town meeting. Finally, the town council will be bound by open meeting and conflict of interest laws, unlike our current town meeting. Now, the folks on the other side will try and make this council manager proposal sound like a strange and risky experiment. Don't be fooled. This model has been tried and tested for years. In fact, it's the most popular model in the country in towns with 10,000 people or more. In Massachusetts, it's working in big cities like Cambridge, in little towns like East Longmeadow, and in Amherst-sized places like Barnstable, Bridgewater, and Watertown. I'd like to close with a quote from the excellent bulletin column by Nancy Eddy, John Olver, and Ellen Story. The current system is simply too opaque for the average citizen. When they vote for town meeting members, constituents generally don't know who they're voting for, where their town meeting representatives stand on important issues, how to share their views and insights with them once they're elected, or how to hold them accountable. We don't think this desire for accountability is all that controversial, which makes the rancor over the forthcoming vote a bit puzzling. It's not as if we're living in a community where our core values are in question. And yet, as we follow the unfolding debate, you'd think that dark forces are conspiring to take over the town. This is simply not the case. These phantom figures do not exist.
Thank you. Thank you. So, big round of applause. We're done with our first part. Now we'll move to the second part of the program. And we've got a lot of questions here. As a reminder, you can fill out your question, hold up your hand, and someone will pick up the card. And each team will have 2 minutes to answer the question. Team members can share the time. No rebuttals. We'll do our best. We're actually a little ahead of schedule of what we expected, so we'll get more questions in, which is great. All questions must come through me in writing. Okay, we're going to proceed with, we'll just keep going in opposite order. I will call on the team opposed or in favor. We're going to start in this part with opposed. We have quite a few nitty-gritty questions about the structure and things like that, which probably will be fairly easy to answer. But you do have 2 minutes. Okay, first question. I have a couple of questions about this. Why go to concurrent 2-year terms when the current staggered 3-year terms provide both continuity and change successfully? And another question similar, why not go to 2 or 4-year staggered terms? So we'll start with the opposed group.
Could you just read the beginning of the first
Yeah.
sentence?
Why go to concurrent 2-year terms when the current staggered 3-year terms provides both continuity and change so successfully? And another questioner, why choose 2-year non-staggered terms over 4-year staggered terms? So, you know, the question is to speak about the terms and the change. So, opposed.
So this is,
Whoever, you choose who speaks.
this is one of the big problems with the charter proposal, which is that everybody is up for election the same day. There are 28 different seats up for election the same day, and people will serve only 2-year terms. And it's a complicated story why it happened this way. But let me say, it was strongly opposed by the school committee and the superintendent, who felt that it didn't give school committee members enough time to learn the ropes and participate. It also, because the regional members of the school committee are 3-year terms, it gives a kind of second level status to the Amherst school committee members, even though we are such a huge share of the budget. One of the things we debated, and I think Mandy and I were on the same side on this, was whether to have the change to the November elections, which people thought would increase the voter participation, and whether or not to have them on presidential and congressional years, which the majority voted not to because they didn't want the students voting for a variety of reasons, because they'd be uninformed and because it's kind of chaotic. And because it would require 2 ballots. So there were sort of technical reasons, but also some political reasons that the decision was made, and it was fairly controversial. But it creates a huge problem of kind of constant political cycle going on and on and on, and never have, 2 years and then another election, and 2 years and another election. I have 30 seconds. Is that what I guess I don't need...
You don't have to use
That's it.
Okay, great.
I really want to answer some of the things that were said, but
Well,
those
I have a
comments
lot
don't
of
fit with
questions.
this question.
I think
so
a
I
lot
won't.
of these things will come up.
Yep.
Okay, the in favor group can respond to the term question.
So yeah, let me just dispel something. We wanted to move to November elections because November elections on academic literature are proven to increase voter turnout beyond elections not held in November, no matter whether they're held concurrent with gubernatorial and presidential elections or not concurrent with them. So the move to November was to increase voter turnout, which is extremely important in any system. You want a large number of voters voting in your elections. So when we decided to move to November elections, we had a choice because state law does not allow us to put them on gubernatorial and presidential election years. And I want to dispel the notion that the Charter Commission was against putting them there. I actually advocated for it wholeheartedly. I wanted it there, but state law does not allow it. So we decided 2 years instead of 4, so we didn't have an option of 3 once we moved to November. And we decided 2 over 4 because we thought 2 was more accessible to everyone. Thinking about running for an office and thinking about, am I going to have to serve 4 or 2, 2 just seems more accessible than 4. 4 is a very long time. And we thought with 4-year terms, people might serve 1 and be done, whereas 2 years you could serve 2, 4, or 6, maybe 8, but 4 years you got 4 or 8. So we thought it would attract more people and a more variety of candidates. So that was the reason we went there. We also talked to Paul Bockelman, town manager, and he said that in Somerville, where there are 2-year terms, that there's hardly ever complete turnover of boards.
Yeah, it works fine in Northampton, it works fine in a lot of other places. Any place that's doing November elections is doing either 2-year or 4-year terms. Peter Demling originally strenuously argued for 3-year terms. He's a school committee member. The opponents like to quote him. He's now endorsing the charter. So,
Okay.
Seems to be working okay.
Thank you.
Can I ask a process question? Do we both get to answer these questions as long as we're within the time limit?
That's correct.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, next question. We'll start with the in favor group. Please explain how zoning bylaws are changed now and how they would be changed under the proposed charter.
The same way is the quick answer. So right now, they have to go on a warrant to be changed, the town meeting warrant, which is the way you get a bylaw passed, any bylaw, whether it's zoning or not, and that the town meeting, the representative town meeting must vote and pass that bylaw change by 2/3 if it's a zoning bylaw. If it's not a zoning bylaw, it only needs a majority. In the town council system, it's the same. It goes on a council agenda. Well, it's mostly the same. It goes on a council agenda, and it needs passed by the council by a 2/3 majority. And In the charter, it's not a two-thirds of those voting or those present, unlike at representative town meeting, where it's just two-thirds of those who cast votes. So you can actually end up with a lot lower than a two-thirds majority. In the proposed charter, it's two-thirds of the full council, so it will always require 9 votes, no matter whether there are 9 councilors there, 10 councilors there, 11 councilors there, or all 13. In addition, if the zoning bylaw there's a state law that has a technical thing that's too hard to explain, but it could actually require a passage by 75% of the town council, not just two-thirds of the town council. And the one big change is the zoning bylaw will be required to be read at 2 different meetings and passed at 2 different meetings. That's the double bylaw, double bylaw reading requirement. And then the final requirement is that anything that affects zoning or planning, whether it be a bylaw or not, actually must go to the planning board for the planning board to look at it under the proposed charter and to come back to the town council and explain whether or not that change, how it fits into the master plan, whether it fits in and satisfies it or works with it, or whether it goes against the master plan, which is a slight change from the current system that doesn't have to have a zoning bylaw fit into the master plan.
The biggest difference is that the deliberating body will be able to
I'm sorry,
discuss it
Ed.
until
Your
they
time's up.
understand it.
Yeah. Okay. Opposed, same question about zoning bylaws?
Excuse me. Basically, it is the same. Currently, either the planning board or a citizen can bring a citizen petition article to town meeting. Town meeting will deliberate and decide. And it does take a two-thirds vote, which means in town meeting, two-thirds of anywhere from 150 to 240 people. On a council, it'll be the same two-thirds, only that would only take 9 people. Right now, it's somewhat a lot of work, but a citizen can bring a zoning proposal to town meeting. I'll be doing that in a couple of months, and by working closely with the planning board and submitting it to town meeting after having been vetted by the planning board. So things won't change that much, except that the closed loop of who appoints the planning board and then votes on the planning board recommendations will exist under a council. It's a little more diffuse now, and it takes a lot more people to change zoning. And zoning changes can affect the nature, the look, the feel of our town for a long, long time.
So if you look at section 2.12, you'll see that the town manager proposes the members of what are called multi-body, of all these committees, it'll come, and the council can approve them or not. They can just accept them or they can reject them. So the council is approving the planning board and the zoning board of appeals. Right now, the manager appoints one and the select board appoints the other. They can appoint both, and then they approve the zoning proposals that same planning board brings back to them.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
2.12.
Thank you. All right, next question, starting with the opposed group. How can the new charter be amended if it is not working? What about town meeting? And I assume that means, could town meeting ever come back, for example? Or
Who starts?
We do.
opposed?
So I'll start on this one, if that's okay. Article 9, I'm going to look for it when Jerry, there's a provision for amending the, in 2024, the charter, the governmental structure. But the Massachusetts law prevents changing the structure, changing the so you can't change it from a council to a town meeting. You can't change it from a manager to a mayor. You cannot change the number of people on any of the different town elected boards. So it's really things like adding another precinct meeting. It's things around the edges. So it's if you wanted to bring back town meeting or any other change, you wanted to add a mayor, you would have to do a whole charter process of gathering the signatures and electing a commission and coming up with another charter proposal and having the public vote on it. And I will now try to find that place, and it's Article 9. And I have it, all these tabs, I have too many tabs.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
9.1.
Basically,
9.6 and 9.1.
basically, it's the same, there'll be a similar process. Some things can be changed by the council, some things can be changed by votes of town meeting. Major changes will take a charter commission, which is, as the proponents know, a lot of work.
Thank you. Does the group in favor want to comment on this one?
You can start telling that I'm the one that talks about the details of the charter. So, Charter Commission, the charter provides for a committee every 10 years to look at the charter as a whole and propose any changes to the town council. That's an automatic thing that the town council can't avoid. Councilors themselves, by a vote of the town council, can propose amendments that then they send to the state legislature for final approval. The residents with 50 signatures can also propose amendments to the town council that if the council passes, then it again goes to the legislature for final approval. And the town manager can also propose amendments. And all of that can happen anytime, not just during that once a decade review. And again, there's a charter commission. You can always change a home rule charter through a charter commission. Town meeting right now, someone would have to bring a warrant article to town meeting to change the current legislative structure, and town meeting would have to pass it, and then it would have to go to the legislature again.
Okay, thank you. Next question. We'll start with in favor. Please compare in detail, in 2 minutes, the process which citizens can, once an issue is on the ballot, not the agenda of town meeting or town council. Sorry, let me start over. It's hard to read. Please compare in detail the process by which citizens can place an issue onto the ballot and under current and proposed charter. Process, timing, signature requirements. And we're not talking about the agenda of town meeting or town council, but about an issue on a ballot.
So
As I read the question, all I have is this card.
So this is, just to clarify, this is about the initiative process?
This,
Yes.
sorry?
About the citizen initiative process?
I think so.
8.3.
All right, well, we're fortunate to have had a lawyer on the commission, actually one of two, and she's sitting here, so that's why I'm giving her the detailed legal answers.
So that introduced me again. So I'm not completely sure of all the requirements for the current Town Government Act. It was just done the last time. To get something on the ballot, it actually has to go through town meeting first and either be accepted or rejected at town meeting. That requires either 10, 100, or 200 signatures, I believe, depending on how you're getting it to town meeting. And then within 5 days, the people have to gather signatures. Of that vote in town meeting, they need to gather signatures. Those signatures need to be, I believe, 5% of the active voters in town, and then it gets to the ballot, and the yes votes on the ballot have to be, I believe, 18% of the active voters. So that's how it gets to the ballot right now. Under the proposed charter, it would go to the town council first if 250 signatures are gathered. The town council would have an opportunity to vote on it. If they vote and approve it, it ends there. If they do not approve it and vote on it or reject it, it goes to get another 5% of signatures of residents to then get it on the ballot. Once it's on the ballot, it's 5% of registered voters that have to vote in the election, not have to vote yes. So there's a turnover. The referendum for the charter is very similar. They have, though, 14 days to gather those initial signatures, unlike the 5 days town meeting you have to gather after a town meeting action. You have, once you're at the ballot, the minimum voter turnout is 20% of registered voters, which actually would have been met at the last referendum, even though the minimum turnout under the current charter was not met at the referendum. So it might actually be easier to challenge a council action under the proposed charter.
Okay, thanks. And the opposed group, do you have anything to comment about on the change in?
Well, neither of us are lawyers. We're not quite as up on all the exact details, but I can tell you that there is a difference between getting a petition article into town meeting versus getting a townwide vote. A townwide vote right now does require a great deal of work. It was done a year or so ago on a school referendum vote. I think 8%. I can't exactly remember how many voters. It takes quite a bit of signature gathering. To get a petition article into town meeting only takes 10 signatures. Some people might argue that's too easy, but I don't agree. As I said, I'm submitting a petition article this year, and it took 10 signatures. I got 13, just to be sure. And it's a good process, especially if one works with the town committees that are involved in that particular petition article, which many people do before they bring it to town meeting. It's a difficult process with the charter or without, or currently to get a townwide vote organized by a citizen. Probably because it should be a difficult process to get everybody to vote. It's expensive to hold a vote.
Okay.
I don't have anything else to
All
add.
set? Yeah. All right, next question starts with the opposed group. A couple of questions on checks and balances. I've heard concerns the new proposal doesn't have checks and balances, but what is the check on town meeting today? And I'm going to also read this question, and you can just speak to the issue. A strong democracy depends on checks and balances, yet charter in section 2.5 states all power is vested in the town council with no checks and balances. How can this proposed charter be good for Amherst? So the question is on checks and balances, and we're starting with the opposed.
One of my favorite topics. I want to say what the check is on town meeting right now. First of all, because that hasn't been discussed very much. Town meeting, because of its size and because of the process of how decisions are made, is incorruptible, as Jerry said earlier. It's unimaginable that you could give a lot of money to a town meeting member and influence to influence their vote and change the way town meeting votes because they're just one person out of 254. The check on town meeting is the fact that generally the executive branch proposes policy and town meeting responds to that by approving, amending, or not approving. Actually, town meeting approves 95% of the warrant articles that come from town hall or town committees, although it's, sometimes those 5% that bother people, but that's how, nobody likes everything. It's interesting to me that somebody would be unhappy with a vote. I was extremely unhappy with the school vote myself and want to throw out the governmental structure. I was thinking what we could do in Washington now. If we had that attitude, we wouldn't have a president, we wouldn't have a Congress. But town meeting is a check on itself by the size and by the process of how decisions are made. And I think my big problem with the charter proposal is that the council is a kind of combo of the legislative functions and the executive functions. It proposes, it disposes. It appoints the committees that propose policy changes, and then it turns around, and approves those. And there's very, very little recourse for citizen input. You can come and speak at the open session, you can write a letter, you can have some signatures submitted, but there's no way that you can weigh in to break up that lock of one 13-person group that has both of those functions at the same time.
Thank you. Next.
This checks and balances argument, I think, is popular with the opposition because it sounds government-y. It sounds like something that ought to be important. But, when you think about it, it's generally talking about.
Okay.
You're generally thinking about the U.S. president and the Congress and the Supreme Court, and we don't have a Supreme Court. So where do you go with this argument? I mean, what we've heard basically is that there's some difference between having a select board and a town meeting versus having a council, but the big difference is that is that there's a separation between the voters and the decision makers. So if there's a slightly different relationship between the executive and the legislative, and there's no connection to the voters, the checks and balance argument is basically moot. This is not an experimental form of government. It's used, as I said, in the majority of towns our size and bigger across the country. And so, it was a progressive era reform that was focused on having professional management and citizen oversight, and then connections to the voters. So that is, the council is a check on the manager, and the voters are a check on the council.
And just to go back to the 2.5 that I believe was the other question. So section 1.3 divides the powers. The legislative powers sit in the town council. All executive powers sit and are vested in the executive branch, which is headed by the town manager. The town manager is defined as the chief executive officer of the town. Section 2.3 states that the town council can't interfere with the town administration other than through the town manager. They can talk to the town manager. They can't order any other town employee around. And the general powers, they're there because we didn't want a charter that was 300 or more pages long. You have to you have to give someone the powers that you didn't talk about in the charter. They have to go somewhere. And so that section puts them with the council if they're not in the charter, but most things are in the charter.
Okay, thanks. There's several questions, and you've all alluded to this school vote, which, not living here, I don't know a whole lot about. But I'm gonna, why don't we take take the next question to talk about it and see in the context of the two forms of government. So why does town meeting get to overturn the will of the voters? As happened during school vote, how can we hold town meeting accountable? Are you aware of the argument that town meeting exceeded its authority in its vote on the school project by voting on the merits of the plan, which were already approved, rather than when we could afford it, or something like that? Do you agree with this assessment? Do you feel responsible for the lack of affordable preschool sports? Forget that last piece. Stick to the school issue and what apparently happened not too long ago. And we'll start with, or it could have been many years ago, we'll start with those in favor.
Yeah, I agree with we all agreed actually on this panel that the school vote should have passed, but I agree with Select Board member Connie Kruger, who said this decision was the single worst decision that she's seen in her past 30 years of local government involvement. What happened basically was that the government should reflect the will of the people, and the voters had voted by a majority to approve the town project, the school project, which would have gotten $34 million from the state to replace our two failing elementary schools. Opponents within town meeting insiders used a technical vote on financing where we had to approve the financing by a 2/3 vote by state law to make that, to implement the will of the voters. But they used that technical vote to overturn the will of the majority of voters in town. And so to me, that's political malpractice, and it's an example of something that people who claim that town meeting represents the will of the voters because the votes were the same, they completely ignore that those were very different types of votes. One was a technical vote on whether we could afford the financing, and the town manager, the finance director, the select board, the finance committee all said we could. And town meeting insiders chose to use that technical vote as an excuse to relitigate the discussion that had already been held by the voters of the town, who ultimately tried to override that and came up with 56% support, which is pretty good support in any vote in town. But that wasn't enough because of the technical nature of this vote. So that's the kind of thing I hate in in national politics, where you get a majority of the Senate voting for national health care or assault weapons bans or something, and then Mitch McConnell uses some kind of insider technique to kill it. And that's what we had happen here.
All right, opposed group?
It sounded kind of, as you heard, I also agreed that I would have liked that vote to pass. I voted for it. I campaigned for it. It sounds kind of nefarious the way Mr. Churchill describes it, as these insiders using technical ways to subvert the will of the voters. It's kind of nefarious sounding. Town meeting vote was almost exactly the same as the town-wide vote. It actually surpassed it by 1%, I think. And yes, that argument is out there. Should town meeting have voted yes because the voters passed it? But the voters passed it by, I think, 6% over 50. It didn't get a real lot of support town-wide, and I think that was a problem.
Just a majority.
Town meeting insiders didn't do this. Town meeting representatives decided it wasn't a good idea. And that's the way it went. And I'm unhappy with that decision, and I'm not going to throw away a form of government that I believe in because of one vote I don't agree with. We're always going to have votes we don't agree with, and there's no guarantee that a council would have gotten a 2/3 vote, which they would have also had to do. It wouldn't have been a simple majority for them either. No one knows how a council would have voted for this. Be
Well,
careful of throwing away the baby with the bathwater.
Especially if the voters have the same influence on the council, who knows how they would have voted. It's very interesting to me that people who are upset, as I was, are not blaming the state law that requires a 2/3 vote, because it was because of that state requirement that we weren't able to pass this. So it's really amazing to me that people would be understandably very, very upset about one vote. Many people who've never been involved in politics or town politics before would want to change our entire form of government over one vote.
Thank you. Okay, turning now to taxes. The opposed group will go first. Amherst has high taxes. Which form of government is better suited to tackle this challenge? Opposed?
I'll start. I'll leave some room.
Okay.
Neither.
Right.
I have asked many, many times of the charter commissioners and charter supporters, how will a council change the taxes in town? How will a council lower our taxes? There is no answer to that. And town meeting's not going to get them lowered, and a council's not going to get them lowered. They're high, partly because a third of our town is not taxable because it's owned by the colleges and universities.
Is it half? It's a lot.
Well, it's at least a third, maybe a half, but I think it's a third. And that's the problem. And I just don't see what either body is going to do to fix that. That's my short answer.
I think it's heartbreaking because the charter takes our attention off something we should be paying very close attention to, which is being more creative about our relationship with the university and putting ourselves in the driver's seat a little more than we are. They're going through an enormous transformation now. I'm sure you've seen the amazing new buildings, the design building, for example, and attracting national students, trying to build a national reputation. Students are coming with more money, and they have the ability to spend it. We aren't in charge of that, and they're, I hate to say it, kind of having their way with us. And this charter, instead of coming together as a community to figure out how we could put ourselves in the driver's seat of this relationship, we're having this huge debate. It's going to be very fractious. A lot of rancor will come out of it, whichever side wins. And we're not talking about how we change some of the structural things that would allow us to have more tax support for our services. And you can't do anything about the law. Tax-exempt colleges and universities, they don't have to pay the taxes. There's nothing we can do about that.
Thank you. Favor?
So I actually believe while you can't predict which one might be able to lower taxes, you can predict which form is better suited to tackle the challenge, because that was the question. Not will it happen, but which form's better suited to tackle the challenge. And that is a town council, because a town council will be able to have that community conversation that Meg was just talking about that we need to have in this town to tackle the conversations on and big picture items, the the challenges we have with our $100 million of infrastructure improvements that we need in town with schools and libraries and DPW building and South Amherst Station, fire station and all, the town council is structured to be able to have those conversations, not just within their own meetings, but to be able to go out to the community and hold meetings with the community in a way to have those community conversations and collaborative conversations to figure out how to deal with those structural challenges. That's a structural thing. Representative town meeting, by the nature of its occasional meetings when 240 people only come together during the warrant process, once the warrant's issued, to talk only about the warrant items on the warrant, can't have those community conversations that we need to be having in Amherst. Town meeting, representative town meeting's not designed, and it's not that it's not designed, it's not able in the structure that it's presented with to have conversations and address the big picture items that we need to be addressing. Instead, it addresses small items like an $80,000 addition to community services, which while it's good, it's not where we need to be having the conversations. We need to be having the conversations community-wide on big picture items, and a town council is just better suited to handle that than representative town meeting.
Thank you.
Select board could do it.
Next question,
Government isn't just.
starting with Favor. How will the new charter affect the public schools? Easy question, I think, but take your time.
Not easy.
Okay, not easy. I shouldn't give my opinion. Favor?
The new charter will affect the public schools by connecting the voters with the decision makers who are working on budget and policy issues year round. So right now we have a lot of discussions that happen. We just had this long discussion about the elementary schools, and the discussion the discussion happens largely in the absence of town meeting. And so there's this long planning process. People put in thousands of hours, and it doesn't have to be this particular project, any school project or any major project. The discussions happen elsewhere, but the people who are having the discussions they're not the deciders. Town meeting is the decider. And so at the end of all this work, thousands of volunteer hours, people get expert on the situation, make their best case, and then they toss it over the wall to town meeting, where anything can happen because there's 30 or 40 things being worked through in a couple of weeks, and you've got a limited amount of time to discuss it, and misinformation can get out and can't be corrected because you can't have conversations. You can't question people who are speaking, and you can't always get called on by the moderator. So we've got this sort of disjuncture between the people who can be thoughtful and take the time needed to understand things and really put proposals together, and then the people who are charged with making the decision, which aren't always privy to those hours of discussions and don't always come up to speed on all the information that they should have to make the decision. So town meeting in school matters or in other matters are just going to have the time, because they meet regularly and year-round, to discuss things, get more information, take more input, correct misinformation, until they really understand it before they vote on it. And I've heard, conversations in town meeting where people have said, I didn't understand it, so I voted against it. And that's not the way we want to be running government.
Thank you. Opposed?
It's really hard to hear people say they heard something and you don't know who said it or when. But anyway, the select board could be having that conversation about our relationship to the university, and they might have it more easily than a 13-person council as a 5-person select board. They're the executive. They could do that right now. This is going to have potentially some significant impact on the schools. We talked about the 2-year terms, which I don't think we need to repeat. The manager is in charge of the budget, so the superintendent will work on it, but it goes to the manager who approves, who determines and brings to the council, which approves the final budget. And I was just trying to find where that is in the charter, but Jerry's going to say something and I'll try to find it. But it's again this kind of taking away some of the leadership of the school committee, in this case around the budget process?
Aside from the 2-year terms, I'm not sure there's going to be a great deal of change. Right now, if the select board wanted to hold any town-wide conversations, excuse me, I'm losing it.
No, you're not.
They can. The school committee will continue to hold town-wide conversations, invite people for all of their meetings. Town meeting generally votes in favor of whatever the school committee brings. There are small exceptions, and of course, there was the big one. Take that one out of the discussion, and it's been working fine. We have great schools. I'm not sure if there's a problem here. We have fabulous schools in our town, and we've had town meeting for a long time. Town meeting debates and discusses the budgets and the proposals brought to it by the school committee, and generally, almost all the time, says yay.
Okay, thank
So
you.
is it up?
Sorry.
The
Time's
place in the charter to
Meg.
find that is,
Time's up.
The
oh,
time's
I'm
up.
sorry.
Okay,
5.4B.
next question. You can get it in your closing statement, if you want. Next question, starting with opposed. Several questions about incumbency and things like that. But I'm going to just ask this simple question. How will the two forms of government ensure that someone does not end up dominating a position for a long period of time? And we're starting with the opposed.
That actually can't be done.
Well,
State,
if you could just talk in
No, I
general
mean,
about incumbency. and-
incumbency.
Yep.
Incumbency, we've studied the statewide statistics, and in council manager forms of government, incumbency is about 90%. It's probably about that for town meeting, although town meeting does change hands, and so will the council. But overall, as you know, as I just stated about statewide and you know about nationwide, incumbents generally win. There's no way to change that with the council. There's no way to change it with town meeting. It happens. And I guess the answer keeps being, that's not going to be affected by any setup.
So statewide council systems have 91% incumbents are reelected, and 59% of the council seats are uncontested. And we can give you the names of the different towns and cities that have them, but I think you can look that up yourselves. So there's no way to guarantee competition unless you have term limits, which for a variety of reasons we actually discussed and chose not to do because it takes away from the voter a choice. So if you believe voters should have the maximum choice and you have term limits, that means they can't choose someone to reelect someone, and it handcuffs them in a certain way. It was a controversial discussion, though, about whether or not to have term limits. But the chances, I think it's magical thinking to think that because we have a council, we're going to have more competition and we're going to have more voter participation. The statistics don't support it, and it isn't logical to me that suddenly we would have more people wanting to run for office. It's magical thinking, in my opinion.
Thank you. Favor?
So actually, the statistics do support that a council will likely have more contested races. Meg just cited a 59% uncontested race percentage for councils. Well, in Amherst, over the last 10 years, 80% of town meeting seats have been uncontested. So if you go down to 59%, you doubled your contested seat number. That's pretty good. And for incumbents being reelected, Meg cited 91% in councils. It's 96% of incumbents that run for reelection in town meeting right now over the last 10 years have been reelected. So again, a council will decrease that number. Might not be a lot, but it's going to decrease the number. Term limits, we didn't put it in the charter. We discussed it. The research out there actually shows that term limits end up with longer terms because people are unafraid, are less likely to run against someone while if there's a term limit in place, they'll just wait till the term ends, that person's hit their term limit. So that's why we didn't put it in the charter. You actually get more turnover without term limits. It sounds kind of counterproductive, but that's the case.
We also, again, there was this concern that with 2-year terms, we were going to have, entire school committee turning over, entire council turning over at once. We talked to Paul Bockelman, who's worked with, many municipalities across the state. He had never heard of that happening. People tend to, it's hard to, if you've got a 5-person board or say a 5-person board, it's hard to get a slate of 5 people that are all going to win against the 5 people that are in there. So voters tend to pick and choose. They might throw some of the bums out, but not all of them. And if there was some miscarriage of justice that was so egregious that the voters rose up and threw everybody out, that's what accountability looks like, and we're about empowering the voters.
Thank you. Okay, this is the last question.
All right.
Then we're going to move to closing statements.
Wow, that's good.
What improvements or changes would you make to the form of government you support to make it even stronger? Parenthetically, or do you think it is flawless as is? So starting with favor.
I'll start. I came into this process thinking that we needed a single political leader, a mayor, and a council. I was willing to look at everything, but that was my bias at the outset. Other people here came in thinking that they just wanted to keep town meeting. Other people really wanted to have a manager. So over the course of time, I came to believe that there was widespread support for the notion of professional management, and people generally felt pretty well served by the professional manager that we have now, and there was a source of comfort in knowing that there would be a professional manager no matter how this election turned out. So I've made my peace with that. I still think there's some benefit to having a point person who speaks for the town, but I'm not as convinced as I was that we need that in Amherst at this point in time. I think that's a source of stability, and I think we have a pretty good town manager now, and I think we've had some successful ones in the past, and I think it's something that we don't really need to mess with right now. So I've ended up being pretty happy with the fact that we ended up keeping that part, and focused really on the decision-making process, which is more unwieldy and disjointed than it should be.
I think it's fair for both of us to answer this because people will be curious. If the charter passes, I'm not sure I'd propose it as an amendment to the charter, but Northampton has, campaign finance has been a big issue in this discussion, and Northampton has passed a bylaw that limits campaign donations for its council races, and I believe it's mayoral race, to 1/2 of the state limit, and I think I'd support doing that in Amherst. I understand there's a lot of concern about the cost of running for council elections. It doesn't need to be done by the charter, but it's something that I'd support.
Thank you. Opposed?
So I'm supposed to talk about how I would want to improve town meeting.
The current, yeah.
Actually, the improvements that I really want are in place and occurring. I really wanted there to be a way for people to contact town meeting members more easily. Before the email system was instituted, you had to call or write to each of your town meeting members, which is pretty cumbersome. But now, as I said, you can write an email and send it to everybody at one time. I think that's really important. The electronic voting that we instituted, I can't remember how long ago, and allows everybody in town to know how people voted in town meeting the day after town meeting session. I think we don't have electronic voting on every item because some of them are almost unanimous. There's no point in it. But anything that's anywhere near contentious will be electronically recorded. And another aspect that has been changed is that citizens are now invited to precinct meetings so that they can hear the discussions that town meeting members are having prior to town meeting and even have their own input. And the fourth change that I really like is that there will be a new committee which will be an advisory committee formed by town meeting members that will advise members on various aspects of each article. These people will then will be chosen to study these articles and report to town meeting on their findings of how they might affect the town in the future and their impact.
Thank you. Okay.
Did it say stop yet?
I don't know. Did we say stop yet? No. You want to make a comment? Yeah.
Stop.
Okay. Well, we've decided to, we're going to closing remarks now, and we've decided to lengthen that time to 2 minutes if you want it.
What?
We have a minute or two to kind of gather our thoughts.
No, as I said at the beginning, we're going to move right into closing remarks. So closing remarks, timekeepers will be 2 minutes. And when we're done, we'll relax. So, Jerry, if you would like to have Meg go first instead of you, we can do that.
Ready? Okay.
Okay, why don't we do that? So, Meg, you can go first.
The primary check of the charter proposal is the voter at the ballot box. There are all sorts of other ways voters can participate. They can go to meetings, but it's really all based on this one idea that is completely unproven. There's no statistical evidence to support it, and in my opinion, common sense doesn't support it. That the government will be held accountable because voters will be aware of how people voted on different policies, and they will go to the polls and vote them out. But think about it. By the time the counselor comes up for election, it may be too late to turn the decision around. The ground may be broken. The contract may be signed. The department may have already been reorganized. And so to me, it's not logical. It defies rationality, and that's why I call it magical thinking, that somehow having voters able to go to the polls and vote for a smaller number of people. It's actually more than twice as many people as they vote for the select board, and we often don't have contested races for the select board. And it doesn't make sense. It just isn't logical, and our experience doesn't support the idea that the primary check on this proposed entirely new system of government is on the shoulders of the voters who are going to go to the polls every 2 years. And again, it's only 19% across the state who show up in local elections of this sort. It doesn't make sense. And so the point I'm trying to make is the entire complex proposal in all these pages rests on that premise. It's magical thinking.
Thank you. Mandy.
Thank you.
2 minutes.
So the proposed charter, I believe, gives power and voice to all of us. It expands it from 240 people to all 37,000 of us. It also keeps what's working, professional management of day-to-day operations by a professional town manager. And it creates a place where thoughtful decision-making and planning can happen. Our town is complex, it's complicated. We deserve decision makers that are knowledgeable on the issues facing Amherst and that have the ability to connect individual proposals to the big picture. An informed town council that meets regularly and year-round as engaged with residents will be able to connect the dots and make better decisions. It will better represent neighborhood interests and the interests of the town as a whole. A representative town meeting, by the nature of its structure, size, and infrequency, struggles with this. The occasional marathon meetings lead to decisions that are made in a vacuum, well-meaning, but without considering all of the resulting consequences. We've outgrown the occasional representative democracy that was introduced 80 years ago when we only had 6,000 residents. We deserve accountable elected officials. We have to have campaigns that address the big issues facing Amherst so residents are clear where their elected leaders stand. We deserve a year-round legislature that ensures that decisions are not made in a vacuum, but with full and public awareness of all the consequences of those decisions. We deserve a government that encourages thoughtful, transparent, and timely discussion and deliberation with and between residents and elected leaders. throughout the entire decision-making process, not just at the end. Read the plan, and I believe you'll agree that a council-manager government is right for Amherst today. Please vote yes on March 27th. We deserve a more accountable, deliberative, and year-round legislature that gives the power and voice to all of us.
Thank you. Jerry?
I know there are a lot of people in town who have wanted to change our government for a long time and get rid of town meeting. What I'm worried about is that now there are those who were not that involved in town government, were not upset with how Amherst was run, that are angry at town meeting because of the school vote. I want to caution people that a lot of good could be done away with over one vote you don't agree with. This charter change will not change that vote, nor will it bring us new schools any faster. Diversity, democracy, citizen participation, transparency, and a voice for Amherst are all kind of buzz concepts that were talked a lot about in our meetings and in public meetings. And I have to wonder how those values that many of us share could possibly be improved upon by shrinking our government to 13 people. Will the act of simply voting for those 13 counselors create, as the commission majority believes it will, better or even sufficient participation in democracy? Do you feel confident that by voting for 5 people, which is what you will be voting for if there is a council, will give you a seat at the table? I'd like people to think about what they love about living in Amherst and think about how did we get to be the town that we are. Did town meeting have anything to do with that? This charter will create a dramatic change in our government and could create dramatic changes in our town. It doesn't have the ability to really address the problems that we are having in our town, such as affordable housing, ongoing issues of equity and diversity, which are rampant across the country, and the influence of the university for good or bad. We've talked about them, but will the charter actually affect those real problems?
Thank you. And Andy?
Since I have one more minute than I expected, I'd like to just sort of address Meg's concern about accountability just being after the fact, and it's not after the fact. If representatives have to articulate their positions before they get elected, and then we can vote on them based on what they stand for, and then we can hold them accountable for actually delivering on that. That's a whole different relationship than we have now when we're reading 50 words about somebody who says, I like schools and open space. So I guess my major concern is that, people love Amherst. We all love Amherst. But a lot of us are worried about it. We worry about high taxes. We worry about competition for housing from college students pricing young families out of town. We worry about big new buildings going up downtown, but seemingly without a plan. We know our school buildings are aging. South Amherst needs a fire station. The DPW barn is falling down. But how are we going to pay for these things? How will the decisions get made? It feels like the day-to-day management at Amherst is pretty good, but the big decisions keep getting kicked down the road, while town meeting spends its scarce time twice a year drinking from a fire hose, making decisions on the fly on 30 or 40 items at a time. In some ways, we have the worst of both worlds. We're too small to be the pure democracy of New England town meeting, where everyone can show up and have a voice and a vote. But we're too big to be deliberative, accountable, and representative democracy, where you know who represents you, and they can meet year-round for thoughtful decision-making. We can stick with the status quo and keep trying to make a town meeting structure from 1938 work in the much more complex and diverse Amherst of today, or we can upgrade our government to a year-round democracy that fits the challenges we face and enlists everyone in solving them. Finally, I'd like to encourage you, if you need more information on this, Mandy and Nick Grabe have a wonderful blog called A Better Amherst, which goes in depth and in very readable bites about all the aspects of the charter and what it does. So I would encourage you to go to abetteramherst.org.
Thank you. Big round of applause for the panelists.
Thanks to Karen.
I'd like to thank our panelists for their participation and the audience for its attention. The league members who served as timers, picked up the cards, and sorted the questions. Amherst Media for taping this program, which will be replayed. Our final thanks to all of you for attending and those who will be watching this program. And lastly, remember to vote on Tuesday, March 27th. It was a pleasure to be here tonight. Thanks for coming. Good evening.
Thank you, Karen.